For 25 years, Spanish football lived with a secret buried so deep that most fans never saw it, and those who did were too afraid to speak. A single man stood at the center of it all, a man whose decisions shaped every whistle, every card, every match day across an entire generation. His name was José María Enríquez Negreira, and for more than 2 decades, investigators say he held the most powerful position nobody ever questioned: the vice president of Spain's referees committee. The man who helped decide which referees rose, which ones disappeared, and who officiated the biggest games in Spanish football. But that's only the surface. Because according to prosecutors, during those same 25 years, a money trail flowed quietly from FC Barcelona, straight into the pockets of the referee official who sat at the heart of the system. No headlines, no warnings, no accountability, just influence, hidden in plain sight. Tonight, we uncover what investigators believe is one of the most explosive sports corruption cases ever recorded. A case built on undisclosed payments, destroyed documents, testimonies never meant to be public, and a structure that, if proven true, could call decades of competition into question. So here's the real question. If one club paid the man overseeing referees for nearly 25 years, how deep did the influence go? Who protected it? Who benefited? And what does it say about the integrity of Spanish football? And tonight at Foul Play, we deep dive into this case to make sure that nothing stays in the dark. This is the Negreira Case. They say football is decided on the pitch. But for decades in Spain, investigators argue the real power sat far away from the grass, inside a quiet office where one man held the keys to every referee's future. His name was José María Enríquez Negreira, and according to prosecutors, he wasn't just another official. He was a gatekeeper, a kingmaker, the man whose influence shaped Spanish refereeing from the shadows. For 25 years, Negreira occupied one of the most sensitive positions in European football: Vice President of the Referees Committee. A title that sounded harmless, almost bureaucratic. But behind the title was a power structure few dared to challenge. Because in 1993, something critical happened. Negreira wasn't only promoted, he was placed inside the Appointments Committee, the elite group responsible for assigning referees to every match in Spanish football, every derby, every relegation battle, every title decider. Investigators say this gave him the ability to influence the season before it began. A referee who clashed with a big club? Send him to the lower divisions. A referee known for leniency? Put him on the matches that needed it. A rising talent? Promote him. Or bury him. And it didn't take long before journalists of that era raised an uncomfortable warning. If any club wanted a certain referee, they didn't need a formal request. They just needed access to Negreira. At Camp Nou's VIP boxes, at youth matches where his son officiated, at quiet meetings where influence left no fingerprints. Negreira denied everything. He insisted his decisions were neutral, fair, and untouched by any outside pressure. But inside Spanish football, skepticism spread. Coaches complained, presidents accused. Journalists published report after report questioning the system, and one detail appeared again and again. Negreira wasn't just number 2. He was the right hand of CTA President Victoriano Sanchez Arminio, the man who whispered into his ear, the man unreferees feared. Because upsetting him didn't just cost you a match. According to referees who spoke years later, it could cost you your career. He influenced promotions. He influenced demotions. He influenced the handwritten reports that shaped a referee's entire future. And prosecutors argue that when one man holds that much control, and that man receives years of undisclosed payments from a single club, the structure itself becomes compromised. Before the money trail, before the headlines, before the scandal exploded, there was this, a power base built quietly in the shadows of Spanish football, a system where influence mattered, and silence protected everything. And as investigators would later reveal, Negreira didn't rise alone. He rose with protection, with partnership, with loyalty at the highest levels. What came next would define an era. To understand the scale of this story, you have to understand the alliance at its center. The partnership that shaped Spanish refereeing for more than 2 decades. Victoriano Sánchez Arminio, and the man who rarely left his side, José María Enríquez Negreira. From the moment Arminio became president of Spain's referees committee, Negreira was there, not behind him, not beneath him, but beside him. Inside the federation, people described the dynamic the same way. He was the right hand, the closest advisor, the voice Arminio listened to behind closed doors. And that raised a question nobody in power wanted to confront. If the president had the final signature, but the vice president whispered in his ear, who truly shaped the decisions? Referees who lived through those years described the CTA under Arminio and Negreira as a rigid hierarchy, a structure built on silence, fear, and absolute control. One wrong move could cost you your career. One disagreement could bury you in the lower divisions. One mistake against the wrong club could mark you for years. So when Negreira walked into a room, referees straightened up. When he spoke, they listened. When he called, they didn't argue. Because according to multiple testimonies gathered by investigators, refusing him wasn't an option. He could freeze your career. He could block your promotion. He could bury you, quietly, permanently, without ever raising his voice. He didn't need threats. His power was the threat. And here's where the structure becomes unsettling. The same man who, according to court filings, judged referees every 2 weeks with correction scores that shaped their entire future, was also part of the committee assigning those referees to key matches. The man who evaluated you was also the man sending you onto the pitch, to the biggest fixtures, to the most delicate games, or far away from both. Prosecutors concluded that during this leadership era, the CTA operated with irregularities so deep, they called it structurally unlawful. Not isolated mistakes, not one season, a system, a pattern, a sustained environment of influence. And when Barcelona's payments to Negreira eventually surfaced, investigators connected the dots. The club paying the referee chief wasn't dealing with some low-ranking bureaucrat. They were paying a man with influence over appointments, promotions, punishments, every tool that shaped competition. Which brings us to the years nobody wanted to touch. The period many hoped would stay forgotten, the 1990s. The decade where investigators believe everything truly began. To understand the real origin of the Negreira case, you have to go back, before the invoices, before the tax investigation, before the scandal even had a name. Back to the 1990s. The decade Spanish football never wanted to reopen. Because according to former Barcelona officials, according to testimonies collected by prosecutors, and according to Negreira himself, the payments didn't begin in 2001, or 2003, or when the tax office started asking questions. They began earlier, much earlier, during the presidency of Josep Luis Núñez. This detail changes everything. It pushes the timeline nearly a decade deeper. It suggests the system wasn't an accident, it was established. Let's set the scene. Between 1993 and 2001, Barcelona enjoyed a dominant era. League titles, Supercopas, domestic power. On the surface, everything looked normal, but behind the scenes, investigators say a quieter process was underway. Barcelona was making undisclosed payments to the vice president of the referees committee, the same man who helped assign referees, the same man who evaluated them, the same man whose influence shaped their careers. Núñez didn't leave invoices. He didn't leave clean documentation. He didn't leave a paper trail. But witnesses did. Journalists did. Former directors did. And even Negreira acknowledged that payments began earlier than the official record shows. So ask yourself, If a club truly feared referee bias, why not file complaints? Why not go public? Why not demand reforms? Instead, investigators say Barcelona chose another method. Keep the man in power close. Keep him loyal. Keep the system stable. And here's the detail prosecutors highlight. During the 90s, the period with the least documentation, Negreira wasn't just vice president. He was part of the appointments committee. That meant one thing. He had influence over which referees officiated Barcelona's matches. Now add years of secret payments. Add testimonies confirming it. Add promotions and punishments that aligned with the interests of one club. You don't need a smoking gun. Influence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it moves quietly. Investigators point to patterns. Referees who made high-profile mistakes against Real Madrid, promoted. Referees who made controversial decisions benefiting Barcelona, unpunished. Referees whose errors aligned with one club's interests, rewarded. Is that proof of match fixing? No. But to prosecutors, it's evidence of a system where influence replaced neutrality. Because the 90s weren't an accident. They were the foundation. The years that shaped everything that followed. From Núñez, to Gaspart, to Laporta, to Rosell, to Bartomeu. 5 presidents, one pattern. Payments that never stopped. A structure untouched for decades. And once you understand the foundation, you understand how the influence worked, how it spread, how it conditioned decisions from inside the refereeing system. Which brings us to the mechanism. Not the money, not the secrecy, but the method that made the entire structure possible. When people think of corruption in football, they imagine envelopes, hotel rooms, whispered instructions. But investigators say modern influence doesn't look like that. Not anymore. Not in a system this sophisticated. Today, it looks like paperwork, like committee decisions, like performance reports. And Negreira stood at all the pressure points. Appointments, promotions, demotions, punishments, correction scores, international nominations. If you controlled those, you controlled everything. So how did the influence work? Prosecutors break it down in 3 layers. Layer 1, assignments. A referee whose style benefited Barcelona, assign him. A referee who clashed with the club, keep him away. A strict referee, avoid him in sensitive matches. No orders, no threats, just routine selections. Layer 2, punishments. If a referee made a mistake that harmed Barcelona, investigators say the CTA punished him, benched, removed from big matches, given poor evaluations. If a referee made a mistake that benefited Barcelona, no punishment. Sometimes even a promotion. Layer 3, correction scores. The most powerful tool of all. Every 2 weeks, referees received a score that determined their future. Income, promotions, demotions. And according to documents investigators reviewed, those scores carried Negreira's signature. Over and over. Imagine refereeing a Barcelona match, knowing the man who evaluates you is receiving payments from that club. You don't need bribes. You don't need match fixing. You don't need explicit orders. Influence becomes internal, psychological, structural. As one former referee said, you don't need to invent penalties. You just appoint the right referee to the right match. Add to this the financial incentive. The higher a referee climbed, the more he earned. The more international matches he officiated, the higher his income. Stability mattered. Promotion mattered. Avoiding conflict mattered. And prosecutors argue this is exactly how the system worked. A conditioning structure, not a bought referee, a bought environment. Then comes the number, 8.4 million euros, across 17 years, through 135 payments, all from Barcelona to companies linked to Negreira. And investigators believe the real total could be higher, counting the 90s. This brings us to the final question, the fallout, the consequences. the part Spanish football still refuses to face. 25 years of influence, decades of payments, a system hidden in silence. Now comes the question that shakes everything. What does it all mean? And what happens if investigators prove their case? For 25 years, prosecutors say the man Barcelona paid wasn't a scout, wasn't a consultant, wasn't an analyst. He was the vice president of the referees committee, the man who signed evaluations, the man whose influence touched every appointment, every promotion, and every match day for an entire era. And prosecutors argue this is where the integrity of competition itself collapses. Because even if no match was ever fixed, even if no referee ever took a secret envelope, the moment the referee chief receives money from a club he is supposed to judge, the entire system loses neutrality. That's the core of this scandal. Not a single penalty, not one red card, not a referee's mistake, but the structure, the environment, a system investigators describe as systemic corruption, one where influence seeped into decision-making over years, not minutes. So what consequences could Spanish football face? Legal experts outline several possibilities: fines, competition bans, administrative sanctions. In the most extreme cases, relegation. Because sports corruption laws in Spain don't require proof of a rigged result. Only an unjustified advantage offered with the intent to influence competition. Payments alone can satisfy that requirement, but the fallout reaches far beyond Barcelona. Every club that competed during those years, every referee whose career rose or fell within the system, every season shaped by decisions now under suspicion. Investigators uncovered even more troubling details. 4 months after the tax office exposed the payments, the Federation quietly voted to eliminate punishments for violating moral and ethical guidelines. A coincidence? A shield? Or a cleanup before the storm? And when the old CTA leadership left office, Sanchez Arminio, the man at the top for decades, reportedly spent hours destroying documents. Documents investigators now consider critical. Inside Spanish football's upper floors, officials like Albert Soler allegedly knew about the payments for years. Some even held government positions. None stepped forward. And then there's Negreira's son, the man who escorted referees to matches, drove them to Camp Nou, and, according to testimonies, offered subtle reminders like, "Barcelona are playing for a lot today. Don't be nervous. You know what to do." Why was the son of the referee chief driving referees to Barcelona's matches? Who allowed that? Who benefited? Who stayed silent? For 25 years, Spanish football was shaped by a man whose influence touched every official on every pitch. Now the courts must decide whether that influence crossed the line into corruption. Because if investigators are right, this isn't just the biggest scandal in Spanish football, it may be one of the biggest in European football history. And the question that hangs over everything is simple. What happens to the legacy of an entire era if the truth goes as deep as it appears? After everything we've uncovered, the testimonies, the documents, the patterns, the silence, one truth rises above the rest. For 25 years, Spanish football wasn't shaped only on the pitch. It was shaped in committee rooms, in private evaluations, in the decisions of a man investigators say was anything but neutral. A man whose influence stretched across generations of referees. A man whose decisions touched title races, relegation battles, and every club that stepped onto a La Liga pitch. A man prosecutors accuse of benefiting from payments made by the very club he was meant to judge. This case isn't about one mistake, or one season, or one club's ambition. It's about the core of competition, about whether millions of fans were watching a fair fight, or a system quietly conditioned from the inside. Now the final word belongs to the courts. Because if everything investigators allege is proven true, the consequences won't just reshape a scandal. They could rewrite the history of modern Spanish football. If you want more investigations like this, if you want the stories others won't touch, the truth behind the silence. Make sure you subscribe, share this video, and help push this story into the light. Because the only force stronger than corruption is exposure. Thanks for watching. If you want more deep dives into the scandals that shape sports, subscribe and share your thoughts below. Tell me what story you want uncovered next.